anyone who would propose or even consider what he is saying as an option must be insane, a sociopath, or a sadist. Because let's just understand here. So he's saying, let's go and launch a nuclear attack that would start a war that would destroy the American people, our country, and the world, and also the Ukrainians, so that we can save Ukraine's democracy. I mean, it literally is insane. And the crazy thing, Tucker, is Senator Wicker is not an outlier. He's the #2 Republican on the Armed Services Committee, and you're hearing the same kind of rhetoric coming from Democrats and Republicans in Congress, in the administration, and in the media, who have no problem with this because they actually agree with it. They're pushing this same narrative themselves, and this is why it is such a dangerous situation that we are facing as we are being pushed closer and closer very quickly, as you said, to a hot war, a nuclear war that would destroy the world as we know it. The thing that I see here, Tucker, that is the same neocons and neolibs in Washington who dragged our country into regime change wars in places like Iraq and Libya and Syria, the same ones who are pushing us very quickly into this war with Russia and never stating once, hey, what's our objective? What are we trying to accomplish here? And how does it serve our country's national security interests?
Exactly.
Not a single one of them are pointing that out. There are consequences to leaders in our country, influential people in our country, to throwing things out like a first-use nuclear attack is on the table. This directly undermines our national security. It directly puts the American people and our country and the world at risk, Tucker, and what are we trying to accomplish here? And by the way, they have more nuclear weapons than we do. So thinking you're just going to launch a nuclear attack and not see a consequence that will lead to a nuclear war that destroys the world is, again, insane, inept, and I don't know how many more words we can use to describe it. It's ridiculous, and these people should not be in positions of power to make these decisions.
There's another issue that you've been in the lead on. It's a big issue. I know we don't have too much time, but I just would love your take because it's very much emerging as a big story, which is the whole situation. You know, it looks like we may be heading towards yet another entanglement in a foreign war with what's going on with Russia and Ukraine. Look, it's not a straightforward issue. My family's Hungarian. When the Soviets invaded Hungary and the West didn't come in to protect and fight back the Soviet forces, that caused a lot of, you know, left people with years of Soviet oppression. On the other hand, I think, would I be happy for my son to go and fight in Ukraine to protect their freedom? Frankly, no. And so the question I have for you is, how do we balance this? You know, we want to deter aggression, of course, but we don't want to get sucked into these military conflicts. You've got the intelligence services out there putting out all this information, looking like they're kind of wanting to take us into war again. What do we do?
Well, I think this brings us back to the last point, is our leaders should be acting in the best interest of the American people and our country. And unfortunately, in this White House, we have warmongers and people like Jake Sullivan and Tony Blinken, who had a very strong hand in being the architects of regime change wars in Iraq, in Libya, in Syria. And they're the ones who are influencing the decisions that are being made by this White House. They are stoking tensions. They are escalating the situation that can only lead us down a more dangerous path that directly undermines the interests of the American people in our country. Let's be real about what we're dealing with here, Steve. We're talking about the United States and Russia, two great nuclear-armed powers in the world. There is only one place that conflict ends. That ends in destruction of this world and life as we know it. Don't be naive. Don't be shy about pointing out exactly what is at stake, and that's what the American people need to know, and that's what people in the White House and leaders in Congress from both sides of the aisle refuse to tell them the truth about.
Very, very well said. We've got to kind of calm it all down. It goes back to what we were saying earlier. He talks about lowering the temperature, Biden. On this as well, he's raising it. Tulsi, thank you so much for being with us tonight. Really appreciate it.
Tulsi Gabbard might know. Tulsi Gabbard represented the state of Hawaii in the Congress as well as the United States itself in the U.S. Army. She joins us now to assess what we're seeing. Tulsi Gabbard, thanks so much for coming on tonight. So here you have the government of Ukraine complaining because the president suggests that maybe we're not going to go to war next week. How distorted is our system that we can be pushed into a potentially nuclear-involved conflict by Ukraine?
Well, let's look at what's really at the heart of what is motivating the decisions being made by our leaders in this country. And what we have is, unfortunately, Democrats, Republicans, the mainstream media, the Washington elite, essentially in the pocket of the military-industrial complex. And rather than looking out for what's in the best interests of the American people, our national security, our country, they see dollar signs when they look at Ukraine. They see how they can line their pockets, how they can, look tough, how they can posture themselves in a position where they personally or politically or financially benefit, rather than actually thinking about what are the costs and consequences of these actions and who pays the price. It's the American people and, frankly, the people of Ukraine.
So my guess is that some of the people pushing for war don't actually want a real war with Russia. It would tank our economy in a second, for one thing, and they'd be held responsible. My concern is they're so inept, they so lack fine motor skills, that they're going to talk themselves into getting us into a war inadvertently. They've got a long track record of ineptitude. Are you worried about that?
I'm deeply concerned about that, because that's very much the direction that we are headed. Tucker, I look back to early 2017, when then President Trump said, hey, it would be good if we got along with Russia. You remember the reaction to that. Everyone from, Democratic leaders, Republican leaders, people in the mainstream media, they said absolutely no way. There were people in Trump's own administration, warmongers like John Bolton, Nikki Haley, Mike Pompeo, who outright rejected it and went on their own agenda. And we're seeing the results of this now. We're seeing the result of how we have continued to have these warmongers escalating tensions, putting us in this disastrous position today, leaving us, the American people, with frankly, the responsibility to stand up and say, we will not accept this. We will not be sheep allowing these warmongers in Washington to lead us down this very, very dangerous and costly path.
I'll never forget when you came out as a sitting member of Congress and said, well, maybe we shouldn't actually fight the Russians in Syria. And you were denounced as a Russian agent, also as a racist for not wanting to bomb another Middle Eastern country, which was my favorite attack ever because it was so insane. But you paid a real cost for that. I mean, they attacked you every day you served in Congress over that. So it seems like this is the red line for them. You criticize war, and they won't stop in their effort to destroy you.
And all of these threads we're talking about here point back to that core motivation that sadly does not lie in serving the best interests of the American people, our security, and our country. It comes from a very selfish place of how they can get more power and get more money, and who they really work for. It's not the American people.
Now, here's something you are not going to hear on the mainstream media. What you do hear is warmongers arguing that we must protect Ukraine because it is a quote-unquote democracy. But they're lying. Ukraine isn't actually a democracy. For example, to hold on to power, Ukraine's president shut down the 3 TV stations that were openly criticizing him and his policies, imprisoned the head of the opposition political party that had come in second place in their elections, and went and arrested and jailed that party's leaders. This is exactly what Putin has been accused of doing. But Ukraine did this all with the support of the United States.